The Missions and Evangelism Lectureship was established in 1984 in honor of Dr. George W. Peters, missionary statesman and professor of missions at DTS from 1961 to 1978. The lectureship gives the seminary community the opportunity to hear missions executives, educators, evangelists, and theologians speak on contemporary issues pertaining to world missions and evangelism. This year, we are pleased to have Dr. Hans Finzel as the speaker for this week's series of lectureships entitled Global Megashifts in Missions Today. Dr. Finzel is a successful author, speaker, teacher, and trusted authority in the field of leadership. He has a great legacy in leadership as he served as president and CEO of nonprofit WorldVenture for 20 years. He and his wife, Donna, recently founded a new ministry, HDLeaders, devoted to training leaders around the globe. Hans is chief leadership guru on the podcast, The Leadership Answer Man. Hans is the author of 8 books, including his bestseller, The Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make. We use this in Zimbabwe. We thought it should have been the 100 top mistakes that leaders make. His books have been translated into over 20 different languages. And he is a graduate of Columbia International University, Dallas Theological Seminary, and Fuller School of Intercultural Studies. Dr. Finzel, please come.
Thank you, Rodney. How many of you were not here yesterday? Yeah, I figure we got a whole new crowd, and I'm not going to entertain. Sorry, yesterday I entertained them a lot, but today, how many of you were here yesterday? Okay, half of you. That's great. You know, who is Hans Finzel? I'm a nobody. You know, you ever think about when Moses was arguing with God about going to the Israelites? I love, you know, my second book, my latest book is called The Top 10 Leadership Commandments. It's a follow-up to Top 10 Mistakes, and I do have a book table. But the reason I bring this up is I fell in love with Moses about 10 years ago when I was in the deepest, darkest days of discouragement in my leadership. And I just thought, this guy didn't quit. He didn't quit. And one thing you can say about Hans Finzel, I went to school here 40 years ago. It's ridiculous. I started here in 1974 in the fall, and I was in this room. Used to be a stadium, and Prof. Hendricks taught us Bible Study Methods 101. I felt like a kid in a candy shop. But I did survive 40 years. I just thought this very moment, hey, Moses did 40 years. I've done 40 years, so I guess I can quit now. But did you ever think about how much he argued with God that he didn't want the job? I'm really not going to talk about reluctant leadership today, but it's the theme of this book. I think reluctant leaders make the best leaders because it's not about their ego. It's not about them. And reluctant leaders go into a vacuum because nobody else will, and they step up and they lead. Reluctant leaders. Well, you know, when he was arguing with God, God said to him, well, just tell them I am sent you. Have you ever thought about how inadequate that is? That's awfully short. Who sent you? I am. That doesn't even make any sense, does it? That makes a lot of sense. I am, and you're not. That's the way I take that. So who's Hans Finzel? I'm nobody. God is everything. We are nobodies. Isn't that great? He uses nobodies. Well, we're talking about 5 mega shifts in missions, and yesterday we talked about mega shift number 1 and mega shift number 2, and today we're going to talk about 3, 4, and 5. But for those of you who weren't here yesterday, what is the okay, I gave my whole story yesterday about how I went to Dallas Seminary, got my THM. I didn't mention yesterday, but after seminary, I became a pastor for a couple of years. We wanted to be missionaries, but some very wise people, including my pastor, Richard Strauss, who some of you maybe remember Steve Strauss. Well, his father, Richard, was my pastor when I was a brand new Christian in the faith, just converted out of hippiedom in 1969. And Richard Strauss, he said, if you're going to be a missionary, and you want to train pastors, you really ought to be a pastor first so you know what you're talking about. Duh. Does that make a lot of sense? So when we left here, we went to Long Beach, California, and we served at First Baptist Church in Long Beach for a couple of years. Then we went to Europe and joined a project that was started by Jody Dillow called BEE, Biblical Education by Extension. Jody Dillow got his doctorate here about the time I got my THM. So we had a wonderful experience in Europe for 10 years. I was mentioning yesterday that I tried to come in here last night and get rid of these lights, but man, they are bolted down pretty serious. Obstacle course. But what was I saying? I don't know. Yeah, thank you. You want to finish? Yeah. So we were missionaries for 10 years in Vienna, Austria, training leaders behind the Iron Curtain during the days of communism. It was such an exciting time. It was easy to raise support. Any of you going to be missionaries, or you're missionaries, you're going to raise support? For us, it was easy. We always said, you know, every dollar you give to us is a dollar to fight world communism. It was really easy raising money. And then I got kicked upstairs to run our mission, and so for 20 years I was the CEO of WorldVenture that works in about 70 countries all over the world. I've had the joy for 30 years to roam the planet. I've been to over 100 countries. And as I roamed the planet as the leader of our ministry, I always told people I'm going on another fruit inspection tour. When I would go to Rwanda or France or Indonesia or Korea or China or you name it, Jordan, I would go on fruit inspection tours as I visited our missionaries. Because Jesus said you should go out and do what? Bear fruit. And that fruit should remain. That's really the work of missionaries, is bearing fruit. So it was such a joy. We started HDLeaders a couple of years ago, my wife and I. HD does not stand for high definition. It does not stand for heavy duty, although I am all about helping leaders be high def, heavy duty, but it stands for Hans and Donna. Go figure. My Twitter handle is Hans Finzel. If you want to tweet, that'd be great. So in all my years, I wanted to share with you this week the things I've seen that have changed so dramatically. Man, you know, we live in times of change. One of the people I love to read is a novelist by the name of Robin Cook. Have any Robin Cook fans here? He's written a lot of medical novels, and he says, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. As I speak on leadership, I always tell people the two most important words in the vocabulary of a leader is listen and learn. Howard Hendricks used to say, if you stop learning today, you will stop leading tomorrow. And that is so true. Well, yesterday we covered 2 of the 5 mega shifts. What was number 1? Our thinking has to change. Not just thinking out of the box, but we need brand new boxes as we think about reaching the world for Christ in this era. Secondly, our target changes. Target is not the most politically correct term in the world of missiology, but it fits because we have adjusted where we need to send people. And how we send who we send. And we saw yesterday that over half of the world's population lives where? Asia, Japan, China, India, 2 biggest nations on planet Earth, where half the people in the world live, is India and China. I'd like you to open your Bibles to John chapter 13. I want to touch just for a moment on my favorite passage on servant leadership. And this is a passage we all know, when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. I believe today more than ever, as we go out into the world of missions, we have to be servants. We have to serve. I'm going to share today how the national church is exploding all over the world. Missions has worked. When people ask me, are you discouraged or are you encouraged generally about the progress of the Great Commission, I say, I am encouraged. It's worked. And because it's worked, the church is exploding all over the world. And we need to serve that church as servant leaders. So Jesus, it was just before the Passover feast, and he knew that his time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. One commentator says, he showed them how utterly he loved them. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas to betray him. And Jesus knew. The most important word in this passage, in this section, is he knew. He knew, he knew, he knew. It says he knew that the Father had put all things under his power. He knew that he had come from God and he was returning to God. He knew he was the most important being on planet Earth. He was the creator of the universe. And knowing that, who was the most important person in that room that night? We all know it was Jesus, and he knew it. And knowing that, what did he do? He got up from the table, took off his clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured the water into the basin. I want you to just imagine for a moment you're there. When we were missionaries in Eastern Europe, we had the most fun just sneaking around Eastern Europe like Christian spies. And we were teaching secret Bible studies behind closed doors in Romania and Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Russia. And Al Moon's here. Al, you were one of our partners. And we, God just blessed us. It was exciting. It was exhilarating. And we had this principle whenever we would have a secret meeting like in Romania, because the secret police was trying to find us and break up the meeting and throw us out of the country. And so we had this principle, nobody that's untrusted is allowed to be at the meeting. It's only by personal invitation, by word of mouth. It's a secret meeting. And that's the same kind of meeting that happened that night at the Last Supper. It was a secret meeting because the mobs were already trying to find Jesus, and everybody was in a frenzy. And so when we had those meetings in Romania, those secret meetings, it was only the most essential trusted people. All right, who was missing that night at the great Last Supper that should have been there but was not there because it was a secret meeting? Who was missing? I thought I set that up pretty good. The servant that would normally wash the feet was the one that was missing. It was just him and his disciples. That's why he got up. Because it was, you guys know this is Dallas Seminary. Come on, work with me here. Maybe you don't know this. There was no servant there. And in that culture, the dirt roads, there was no pavement, there was no asphalt, there was no concrete. Their feet were dirty. Somebody needed to wash the feet, and nobody did it. And so Jesus went over to the corner and he picked up the basin. And if you were in that room that night and you saw him go over and pick up that basin, what would be your first thought? You don't know yet what he's going to do. You don't know that he's going to do it. I think my first thought would be, who's he going to give the basin to do the dirty work? Right? Who's he going to give the basin to do the dirty work? Now, there were three people in that room at that moment who were arguing. What were they arguing about? The three? Peter, James, and John. You guys know this story? What were they arguing about? Hey, Mr. President, is it okay if they talk back to me? Hopefully. Okay. You have permission. What were they arguing about? Who is the greatest? And they're sitting there thinking, while they are arguing, well, certainly he's not going to give the bowl to us because we're the most important three people in this room next to Jesus. They were arguing. And right before the dinner, the moms came to Jesus and said, would you let my son sit at your right and your left? And And so who do you think they might have thought he would give the basin to? Who would be the logical low man in that room that night? Who do you think? Judas. Somebody say Judas? Yeah. You know, Judas was a schmuck, you know? You know that word? He was, you know, you have a leadership team and you got somebody on the team that's just a dead weight, a dysfunctional part of the team, and you really want to get that person off the team, but you don't know how to confront the situation. Well, that's Judas. Well, what happened, as you know, it says, he got up from the meal, he took out his outer clothing, he wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, you're going to wash my feet? No way. And Jesus said, you don't realize now what I'm doing, but later you will. No, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus said, well, unless I wash your feet, you have no part of me. And Peter said, well, then pour it all over me. Oh, man, I love Peter. So you were sitting there that night, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. And you knew he was going to eventually come to you. How would you feel about that? What would be your emotions? What?
I would feel guilty.
Guilty, thank you. Unworthy? Oh, man, just like Peter. Lord, I should be doing it, but you didn't take the initiative. Did you know the key to servant leadership is taking the initiative without being asked to do the dirty stuff that needs to get done? That's servant leadership. I would have sat there and said to myself, why didn't I take the initiative? The bowl was sitting there. I could have done it, right? That's servant leadership. Isn't it beautiful? He had no problem washing the disciples' feet. Then he washed every one of the feet. He even washed the feet of Judas, didn't he? Well, then he, in verse 12, when he had finished washing their feet, he put his clothes back on, and he returned to his place, and he sat down, and he taught them the teaching moment. I love how Jesus always used illustrations. Yesterday we looked at when he filled the boats with fish. And then he told them, from now on you will be fishers of men. And here he sits down. Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, like the most important person in this room. And he says, rightly so, because that's what I am. And now I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet. You should also wash one another's feet. I've set you an example. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, do it, right? Do it. I love that. Howard Hendricks always used to tell us, you know, we in the Christian world are long on information and short on application. It's always a danger to know too much and apply too little. And that's why he finished that little passage there by saying, hey, if you know what I'm talking about, go out and do it. So let's talk about these shifts in mission. The next, because it's an attitude of being a servant that's going to permeate the rest of what I'm going to say today. The best model of leadership today is servant leadership. And it's the posture we need to take as we go around the world. The third mega shift in missions is our tools have got to change. The tools that we have. Yesterday, if you weren't here, I mentioned that we are still fishing for men and women and boys and girls. That hasn't changed. But man, has the fishing changed. How we catch fish. The lake has changed, the water has changed, the atmosphere has changed, the fish have changed, the bait and tackle have changed. We have such amazing tools today at our disposal. There have been 3 great revolutions in communication. I'm sure you know this. The first great revolution were the Roman roads. I was talking to my kids. I have 4 children. And I remember when they were littler, one time we were talking about the fact there was a time in the world when there were no roads, and they couldn't get this. You know, they look out we live in Denver. We have roads in Denver. You have roads here in Dallas. And can you imagine a world without roads? People used to never travel more than 5 or 10 miles from their home from the time they were born to the time they died. And then the Roman roads came. And when did that happen? During the days of the New Testament. And we were able to take the gospel further than we ever thought of because of the roads. Well, the second great revolution, of course, is the printing press. Who invented the printing press? Gutenberg, ein guter deutscher Mann, ja. What's the first thing that was ever printed on the Gutenberg printing press? The Bible. And you know what else right after the Bible? Martin Luther used the printing press to print these little leaflets, challenging the authority of the established church at that time and beginning to propagate his ideas that we could go directly to Christ and that we could have our own Bibles and hear directly from God. The printing press changed the world as much as the roads. Well, you all know we're living in the third great revolution of communication, the internet revolution. And it's changing the world as dramatically as the printing press, as the roads. Here's a chart of cell phone technology around the world. Who has the most cell phones? Look who has the most cell phones on planet Earth. Well, the European Union, and then China, and then the United States. This is a little behind. It's a couple of years old, but it's still pretty accurate. The explosion of smartphones is changing the world. I just got back from China, and you've ever heard of people trying to smuggle Bibles into China? Or there's actually a press, in Amnesty, the Amnesty Press in China that does print Bibles. But this is a house church meeting that I was just at 2 weeks ago. Hey, Dr. Bailey, as an aside, this fella who's speaking there, his name is Canaan. I mean, I could spend the rest of the morning telling you the exciting stuff going on in China. Tomorrow I'm actually speaking the whole chapel, Think China. But Canaan is a young engineer. He works for Mercedes, and he was preaching. Notice the guy sitting next to me. He's got the Bible app. He's got the Bible on his phone. And it's available all over China now, the scriptures on the phone. And I thought, how cool is that? I wanted you to know that Canaan's dream is to come here and be a student and get his THM. And maybe you guys already know him. That's his English name. But he works for Mercedes as an engineer, but he has such a passion for Christ and for the church. And he says, Hans, I want to go to Dallas Theological Seminary. And I just thought that was so cool. I encouraged him to do it, by the way. I was trying... The reason I say that, I was trying to talk him into going to CIU, Columbia, and no good. He said, no, I want to go to Dallas Seminary. The coolest thing about this church, there was nobody in this church over 30 years of age. This church didn't exist 5 years ago, this house church, because they're all brand new converts. And they are so hungry, and they have the Bible. I have a friend, this gentleman here, his name is Shikong Chu. Shikong Shu. He lives in Baltimore. He's from Taiwan. He made his fortune in technology. He's lived in Baltimore 38 years, but he's from Taiwan and he is Chinese. And he's taken his fortune now and he's trying to put as much of courses from Columbia International University. I know you guys are involved as well in China, but he has created a YouVersion Bible app for the Chinese. It was just launched a year ago, and they've already had 2 million downloads. What an amazing thing. We have technological opportunities. You guys familiar with the Jesus film? The Jesus film has been around for a long time, but they now have the Jesus film app. You know, the Jesus film has been used to share the gospel with more people than any piece of technology in history. Paul Eshelman, who created it, over 30 years ago? What a great vision. Perhaps some of you in this very room will be getting a vision to do something that's never been thought of, to create a way to share the gospel and to teach the word that we've never thought of. That's what Paul Eshelman did. You can now have this app on your smartphone and be sitting in a cab on virtually in any country on planet Earth just about, and you go to the map, you pinpoint where you are, you find the language that it's available in, and you can ask the cab driver, hey, would you have 5 minutes to hear about Jesus? Yeah, I got 5 minutes, as long as I keep the clock running. And you can show this cab driver in their own language the Jesus film snippets on this free app. The technology is amazing. Speaking of technology, if you'd like to get my slides from this week, just text your name and email to this text number here, and I'll give you all my slides from this week in case you'd like to have them. I see some of you taking some notes, so just text your name and email to that number. So number 4, the technique has changed. The technique has changed. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a huge shift in the technique of how we do missions. And the biggest shift I see today is from professional ministers to ministering professionals. You know the difference? The places that need us the most today are closed to professional ministers. Professional ministers are people who are, they're theologically trained and they have an ordination and they go out as pastors and missionaries, traditional missionaries. Am I saying we don't need those anymore? No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying today the biggest shift I see, and I actually see it in the New Testament. You ever heard of the idea of tent making? It's the same thing. Paul was not a professional minister. He was a ministering professional. This is a picture of a short-term team that I led to, this is in Chengdu, China, and this is a restaurant, the Red River Grill, which is a business's mission project, where they have created this restaurant as Christians to be a witness to that part of the world, to that community. And it's not just a front to get in the door. It's the real deal. I happen to believe that professionals can have an amazing impact for Jesus Christ. Do you guys know who Truett Cathy is? You ever heard that name? Well, I think we need as many Truett Cathys as we need Billy Grahams. Truett Cathy is the one who founded Chick-fil-A, a Christian company that truly oozes the faith everywhere they're planted. You see, that's being a ministering professional. And that's what we need all over planet Earth. I was in Macau, the little island nation next to Hong Kong, and I met with these Chinese doctors. You know, those of you, how many of you here are from China? Do we have any Chinese? Okay, we've got the Chinese group over here. You know how difficult it is to be a Christian doctor in China? The whole medical system in China is kaput. It's broken. And it's controlled by the government. And if you want to really be a doctor who shows Christian, Christ-like compassion, the whole system works against you. And so this clinic in Macau, it's called Hope Clinic. They are developing a new army of these young Christian doctors who want to go back into China and start clinics that truly represent Christ in their community. That's awesome, isn't it? Wow, that's being a ministering professional. Here's something controversial. I hope you guys don't throw me out for this. Agree or disagree? I saw this on Twitter the other day. We don't need more pastors in the pulpits. We need more ministers in the marketplace. Ooh. Is that controversial? Is it? You agree or disagree? I agree. We need both. My goodness, we would be sunk without pastors in the pulpit preaching the Word of God. However, today, in the world of missions and global evangelism, this is the greatest need. I was asking the World Missions team, we had dinner last night, and I was asking Rodney and some of the others at the table, Mike, are you here, Mike? Yeah. How many DTS students nowadays are going to kind of fall into that category? And he said, a lot of you. You've come already having a profession, and now you're getting your Bible. And then when you leave, you're going to go out and continue to be a ministering professional. And I'm saying, awesome. We need it. We don't need more pastors in the pulpits. We need more ministers in the marketplace. The final shift is the team. I love this part. The team has changed. Who is doing the work? I had a chance to be in Albania. What a great country, Albania. You know, during the days of communism, it was the most atheist country on planet Earth at that time. I think today North Korea holds that prize, but back in the day, the government of Albania prided themselves that they had abolished all forms of religion, period. And in 1991, communism fell. And guess what? Communism is dead in Albania and the church is thriving. Woo! I love it. Guess who won that battle? And so the cool thing about Albania, there is not a single church in Albania that's older than, what, 23 years old. Did you know when churches get old, they get issues? Did you know that? The older a church is, the more it has issues and the more the history is like this anchor that you pull along to the future. Have you noticed that? Are you involved in an old church? If you are, I bet you're fighting battles. So the cool thing is that there's no church in Albania that is older than 23 years. And the church is thriving. And these missionaries here, these 7, I had a chance to help train them. They are Albanians going from Albania to Turkey. Because next to Albania, the largest population of Albanians in the world is in Turkey and in Macedonia. And these missionaries are going from Albania out to these other countries. So things have changed. It's not just this paradigm anymore. This is the old thinking about missions. We're selling our house. We're becoming missionaries. We're going overseas. Now, do we still need this? Yes. But it's only a tiny, tiny part of the story. Tiny part of the story. I had a chance to go to the Lausanne Congress on World Evangelism in Cape Town, South Africa. Who else went? Were you there, Ron? Anybody here get a chance to go? It was amazing, wasn't it? There's a couple of pictures. 4,500 people, 1/3 of them women, 198 nations represented. It was primarily dominated by the global South and the global East, and only 400 Americans were allowed to go. So I was really honored that I could go. Why did they only want 400 Americans to be there? Because they didn't want us to dominate the agenda. Servant leadership. Those 400 of us who were there as servants. And the pulpit, the messages, the singing was definitely not American. It was global. And when I got back, I was telling Donna, my wife, we've been married 39 years. Next year's our 40th wedding anniversary. And I said, you know, I don't think I've ever experienced anything more that's probably like heaven than I experienced in that Congress. Now, I'm pure German. You guys figured that out, right? And we Germans, we have no emotions, you know? Now I sound like Arnold, you know? My wife sometimes said, I don't think you have an emotional bone in your body. Sometimes I'm a little too cold and calculated, but I got so emotional listening to these 198 nations all worshiping together in this massive Congress hall, all singing in their own tongue. Can you imagine? I mean, it was spine-tingling. And I thought, Lord, this is just a small taste of what heaven's going to be like. When we all get there on that day and we stand before the throne and we worship people from every nation, every people, every tribe, every tongue. Well, I learned some things at that Congress. Here was my takeaways. The world has changed more than we know. The church over there is stronger than we know. Missions has worked. Why was that place filled with thousands and thousands of people representing churches from 198 nations, from the global South and the global East? Because missions worked. Missions worked. Globalization is a game changer. Our role from the U.S. must change dramatically. It's no longer from the West to the rest, but from anywhere to everywhere. That is missions today. Now, you all know that, don't you? I'm sure you guys have been teaching that in your missions department and your missions classes. It's so exciting. We don't have to carry the weight anymore. We, America. We are only 5% of the world's population. But I'll tell you, we still have the most Christian resources on planet Earth. I had a conversation just last week with a mission group, and they said, Hans, should we quit sending missionaries from America and just send our money? Well, I've asked nationals that question all over the world. As I travel the world and I ask national Christian leaders, would you like us to stop sending our sons and daughters and just send money? You think they'd say, no, just send the money. That'd be great, you know? Lots of money. No. Every single one of them say, no. We need your expertise. We need your training. We need you to help us train our missionaries and train our pastors and train our leaders. So missions has changed, and now we've come into a role of training and equipping as servant leaders, right? As servant leaders, not dominators. This picture is a few years old. I was a younger man back then, but I love this picture because I was with a group of, these are denominational church leaders, Baptists, from the Philippines, Japan, Macau, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Indonesia. And we had a big consultation. And the result of that meeting was it's time for the receiving church to become the sending church. That's what we were pledging that day as we put our hands together, because our missionaries from WorldVenture had pretty well spawned all their church movements in their country that they were representing. These were the national leaders. They were fruit from our missionary work. And I loved it when they got it. When they get it, it's so exciting. It's time for the receiving church to be the sending church. And that's the technique that changes so dramatically. Well, those are the 5 mega shifts. Our thinking changes, our target changes, our tools, our technique, and our team. And I would just challenge you this morning, no matter where you fit in the continuum of world evangelism and missions, I would like to challenge your thinking. Don't put God in a box. Don't predispose you got everything figured out. When I was a student here so many years ago, I thought, wow, Lord, I just want to serve you. I had lunch yesterday with one of you students, and he's going to be graduating in May, and he was a little exercised about what he was going to do when he graduated. He's a businessman who's actually left the business world to go into ministry. He's 41 years old, and I said, you know, the fact that you have a business background is awesome, because the church needs more people that can help them get organized and lead better. But I said, I'll tell you something. God leads us like a headlight on an automobile. The light only goes so far out there in the future. And some of us, maybe some of you are obsessed about the future. You live in the future. You want to know all the answers. We won't have all the answers. God leads us one step at a time. But I would challenge you to really think, Lord, am I thinking straight about what I'm going to do? Am I thinking straight about the paradigm that I'm locked into? Because we live in times of change. And in times of change, learners inherit the earth. Hey, thank you. I'm going to be out the book table. Chaplain, I want you to close our time in prayer. Hey, thanks so much. You guys are a great audience.